โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're here to talk about the practice of the Dhamma again. The Dhamma being the truth and the path of practice that helps us to realize truth. And truth is what sets us free, brings our mind to peace and understanding. Just now we practiced some mindfulness of breathing together, and I think most people find that it's always illuminating to practice meditation because it helps you to see your own mind more clearly in the present moment. Because so much of our time and life is spent with our mind rushing out of itself through the sense doors out into the world, thinking about the world and reacting to the world, getting caught into things we like and the moods and the desires those stimulate, caught into reactions and negative desires based on experiences we don't like. And that's going on all the time. So much of our day we're not that closely in touch with our own mind. And this is why stress and suffering can arise so easily because when you're not aware of your own mind, we tend to go towards delusion. And as we know, the Buddha pointed out, delusion, ignorance, is the root cause of all our problems and suffering as human beings. Another way of talking about delusion is unawareness. We're just not aware of what we're doing with our minds, and then that carries out or carries on into our speech and our actions. And if we sit down and think about it, maybe think back to whenever you can remember some time recently when you felt unhappy or stressed. If you can really closely follow up what was taking place at that time, you'll probably agree that the mind fell under the sway of a particular mood or desire or attachment, and that was affecting the way you felt, the way you thought, the way you spoke, the way you acted at that time. And now, maybe with hindsight and being able to look back at that event, now you can maybe see what was going on. But at the time, we miss it. We missed it, and we didn't realize how we were creating suffering. It may be just something you were expecting to take place and happen, and it didn't happen like you wanted, so you got frustrated. Or something very unpredictable arose in your day, and somebody said something you weren't ready for, or did something you weren't ready for, caught you out, and you started to get stressed. Or maybe it's just a feeling in your body. Sometimes that's enough to cause us stress when we're not mindful. If you have a painful feeling, if it's a seriously painful feeling, you might think, what's that? Am I going to die? Or even, if it's not an extremely painful feeling, just a mild discomfort, it still brings up the worry or the doubt. What's that? What's wrong? So our life is full of this moments of unawareness where things happen and our mindfulness, our awareness is not quite there, not quite keeping up with what's going on. So we don't see the truth of things, and we get caught into our own moods and suffering. But if you're practicing meditation, you're starting to observe how that is taking place all the time, every day. But now what people find is they start to get at least some perspective on what's going on in their mind. And maybe you've seen this problem occur over and over again, how you get lost in a train of thought or a mood or a worry or reacting to something. How that caused you some stress. And so little by little, your wisdom and your insight starts to grow as you practice meditation, especially if you practice every day. And you might find at least sometimes, maybe you're starting to feel stressed in a certain situation. You might not yet know exactly why, but because you practiced mindfulness and meditation and contemplated these things before, when it's happening, you have that awareness that maybe I'm going wrong in my thinking here somehow. Maybe I'm attaching to something in some way. You don't yet know fully what, but you have an awareness that it's probably that is the cause of your stress at this time. So you start looking to where you're attaching, getting caught up in your, a certain feeling that's arisen, painful feeling, or getting attached to a pleasant feeling and wanting to hold on to it maybe, or getting attached to the various desires and thoughts that are based around these experiences. So you start looking, investigating, and maybe you can see what's going on. And because of your experience in meditation, little by little you start to appreciate how actually the best thing to do, rather than always grasp at every feeling and every sensation and every thought, is maybe to establish mindfulness first. When you can, when you're aware enough to do that, come back to the place of mindfulness so that you can consider what is going on in your mind and in your experience at that time. The way the Buddha talked about a human being, the Buddha was, in his great wisdom and compassion, he made our practice a lot easier for us than if we were just trying to find our way ourselves on our own. The Buddha is our greatest teacher, and then the enlightened noble ones following in the footsteps of the Buddha have also been our best teachers. They made it easy for us. They talked about a human being as made up of what we call 5 Candas, 5 groups of experience, 5 groups of what it is to be a human being. So there's the physical part of our existence, the body, and that also applies to the external world. The world is obviously made up of physical form. But then there's the 4 mental khandhas, or mental groups of experience. And the Buddha divided our mental experience into 4 things to help us look and understand better, giving us clues, giving us pointers where we have to look to see where our stress, where our suffering arises. And so the 4 mental khandhas are feeling, which is like the tone of our experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant, neutral. Perception, that means the way we remember things. So the labels we put on things, the way we remember things based on our past experience, the description, the perception we have in our mind. Then there's sankharas, meaning thought formations, that part of our mind which is the will to do things, where our intention is at work, making decisions, wanting, not wanting, liking, not liking, and making choices and decisions all the time. And then consciousness itself, sense consciousness, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. So these are what we call the 5 groups of experience, the 5 khandhas. And putting it simply, the Buddha said, as long as we are caught into unawareness, our mind will always go to identify with these 5 groups of experience with the sense of self, ownership. So the obvious one is this body. We have this sense, this is my body. Feelings, we have this, my feelings, a pleasant feeling, we tend to enjoy that, like that. So we say, my feeling, if it's something we like, we want more of, so that will stimulate desire for more or to hold on to. Summer is here, so more pollen in the air. So feeling pleasant or unpleasant, we attach to that. The unpleasant we don't want, we want to get rid of. Neutral tends to make us more just dull, unaware, because it's less stimulating. Perceptions, we attach to them with a sense of self. My memories, the way I remember, the way I label the things that have happened to me. So they're not always going to be the same for each person, but it's how you label things and remember things based on past experience. So you may remember something as very pleasant, desirable, say the taste of food or a person, you like them, so you remember them in a certain way. Or it may be an unpleasant experience, food that didn't agree with you, or weather that was unpleasant, or a person that was unpleasant, so you have a perception about them. So we attach to them with a sense of self. Then thought formations we attach to with a sense of self, my thoughts, my idea, my plan, my desire, what I want to do, and all the thoughts that come up associated with that. And then sense consciousness also becomes the basis for this sense of self to take ownership and grasp onto it as me, mine, myself, my seeing, I'm seeing, I'm hearing, I'm tasting, I'm touching, and so on. So the Buddha gave us this little description of how to look at ourselves while we're meditating. We have 5 Candas, 5 groups of experience. They have one thing in common, is that when we're not aware, we're not mindful, we're not aware, we tend to grasp at each aspect of those five Candas, 5 groups. And this is where suffering comes from. If you keep grasping at something, gradually it will start to feel heavy. My teacher Ajahn Kalyano used to give the example, say like, here I have a water pot or a kettle of water. Like, normally I just pick it up like this, doesn't weigh very much, I can hold it. But if I keep holding it, after a while my arm starts to get tired. The longer I hold on to it, it's going to get tired. When you get tired, instinctively you want to put it down. But you can only put it down if you're willing to let go. And with our 5 Candas, because we're so used to grasping hold of them and identifying with them in their various characteristics, we're a bit reluctant to put them down and let them go. So they start to feel heavier and heavier. Then we start to suffer. So when we're practicing meditation, the reason we start to feel a bit happier is because we feel lighter in our mind, because perhaps we're seeing some of the heaviness of all that grasping and attachment and starting to put it down. One thing that helps is if you have something else to put your attention on, then it helps you to loosen your attachment to all these 5 Candas. So we've been practicing mindfulness of breathing. So you could say, well, that's part of the Candas, that's part of the physical form of the body, the breathing. So we're attaching to that, so that can bring us suffering, can it not? You might have that question, and it's true. You can attach to the breath and suffer with the breath. We certainly suffer when we're short of breath, or in a situation where we can't breathe, or if we have an illness, respiratory illness, we suffer. And we can identify and suffer with the breath, of course, but normally speaking, we're not suffering with the breath. It's just going on, doing its thing, whether you're aware of it or not. So we can use it as a skillful means, a tool to help understand and let go of the other Candas, the other groups of experience. So yes, the Buddhist path is not teaching us to forever cling to the breath as our new reality. It's all about clinging to the breath. That's who I am, that's what I want to be the breath forever and ever and ever. It's not what the Buddha was teaching, but he was using it as a skillful means to bring up more awareness so that then we can contemplate back to understand these 5 Candas and see them from a place of clarity, see the reality, the real nature of these 5 groups of existence. So we're learning to put attention on the breath. Ultimately, we will be practicing letting go of the breath itself as well. But in the beginning, we hold on. We practice mindfulness of the breathing. And as we do that, it's already loosening this tight grip, tight grasp we have on the other 5 Candas of the body. This is why if you practice mindfulness of the breathing and your mind is staying with it for a while, even if only for a few seconds, a minute or 2, whatever you can achieve in your meditation period, you start to feel lighter, you feel more relaxed because you're letting go of everything else. So this is why people say when they're ill, but they've learned to practice mindfulness of breathing, they can turn to their breath, put their attention on that feeling and just let go of all the painful sensations in the body, the worries, the concerns about their illness, say. And it can be challenging if you have serious illness, of course, but one can do this. So the breath can become a very good friend in times of illness. It can become a very good friend in times of aging, because as we get older, the body creaks and aches and moans more than it used to. It's not as agile, not as comfortable as it used to. But if you have the breath to turn to, that can help you to let go of some of the attachment to the body as we age. Can help us with more superficial attachments to the body, the concern about the way we look, whether we look beautiful or ugly, bits and pieces of this body that we're normally obsessed with, our weight, our height, our colour of our skin, blemishes, whatever. When you close your eyes and turn to the breath, all of that can be let go of very quickly, all those perceptions and attachments. So it can be very peaceful to use the breath meditation in this way. Even harder to see is the mind itself. The mind is so fast and so subtle, but we can still use the breath meditation to see and understand the 4 mental Candas, or the mind, better. The mind is so subtle, often we are missing it. It's fast, it's moving around, we think one thing, we feel another thing. From moment to moment it can change very quickly, and often it seems a little bit out of control and can't really be sure where our mind is and what it's doing. So that's why we need the steadiness of mindfulness of breathing, because it kind of gives us this inner awareness, sense of contentment, and inner awareness gradually is starting to reveal the mind where we didn't see it before, or where we didn't know it before. It's a bit like when you're outdoors, you can't see the wind unless you put something in the way of the wind. So people want to know which way the wind is blowing from, they'll put up a flag, for instance. Once you put a flag up, whichever direction the wind is blowing, you can see, because the flag will move according to the wind coming from that direction. Or if you don't have a flag, you can just put your finger up. You lick your finger and put it up, and then you'll feel the coolness of the wind, whichever direction it's coming from, on your wet finger. The mind is a bit like that. You need something to expose the mind. And again, that's why we use the breathing meditation. And this quality of mindful awareness, clear comprehension, the clarity, and then the calm and the stillness that comes from that helps to expose the mind as it's working, the workings of the mind. And why do we want to do that? Well, it's exposing how we suffer because we cling and identify with our perceptions, feelings, thoughts, sense consciousness. So this is the real value of meditation, why the Buddha encouraged us to practice mindfulness regularly, because it's revealing our own body and mind to us, showing us the true nature of this body and mind, and how the more we grasp at it, identify with it, hold on to it, the more we suffer, and it feels heavy. So sometimes when we practice mindfulness of breathing, your mindfulness becomes very continuous, very good. And as we put effort in, that's quite possible. Maybe not every time you practice, but there may be those times, sometimes, when you do start to settle down and you're letting go of your worries about the past, thoughts about the future, all the different confusing feelings, sensations, even letting go of sleepiness. It is possible to do that through our effort. We put effort into practicing mindfulness of breathing. And there may be those times where you experience a real sense of letting go. And that's the aim of this meditation, is to let go of that normal obsession and attachment to every thought, opinion and view, every feeling, every sensation, putting it all down, letting it all go, so that we can just experience the mind as it is, just the mind knowing the breath and being in one place. So it's very rested, it's not rushing around here and there. And this gives us such a valuable insight into our lives, because you can see at that moment, when you do at least temporarily put things down, you can see things can be let go of. So most people find at that moment, when they have an insight of letting go of everything, if only for a few seconds, a few minutes, they get so much confidence in what the Buddha taught, so much confidence in themselves, so much relief when they realize, oh, I can let go of my worries, my concern, my anger, my fears, all the kinds of normal feelings of stress and experiences of stress we may have in our daily life. Letting them go gives us that insight that these things can be let go of. And your mind grows from that, grows in its confidence, grows in its strength. And you generally get what we call piti and sukha, sense of rapture, joy, contentment arising, where your mind is finding the taste of the inner peace, the inner happiness of letting go. And this is a very valuable experience for us as human beings. It's like, putting the heavy thing you were carrying down for once and experiencing the relief and the happiness of doing that. Of course, unfortunately, because our habits are so ingrained, what we tend to do next is finish the meditation and start picking everything up again. And everyone has experienced this. You may have one day where you have a very peaceful, relaxing meditation where you're just observing the present moment, the breath go in, breath go out. Maybe even the breath disappears and you're just with the mind itself, bright, happy, content. But then you finish and you start thinking again. And as you start thinking, you start reacting to your experience, and you start planning what you're going to do next. You've got things to do, and you start sensing your body again, feeling hot and cold, pleasure and pain. And basically we start picking up the heavy burden of the world again after the good meditation, the peaceful meditation, and we're back to square one. And often that's a bit deflating. It's like, oh, I had such a good meditation and now it's all gone. And we easily get disappointed at that moment. So you have to be very patient and strong at that moment and not give in to the feeling of disappointment and the sense that it's hopeless. I've been practicing meditation for so many months, years, and look, here's me getting angry again over the same old things, or greed again, desiring this, desiring that, or getting worried or afraid. This will happen. So again, you have to come back and trust in the method, trust in the practice, and maybe observe how even though your mind does start to pick up these 5 Candas again, start to cling to them again, and the heavy feeling comes back, it won't necessarily come back quite as strongly as before. In a short space of time, you might not realize this, but over a longer period of time, you might start to see, I'm not clinging quite so much as before. So how do you see that? Well, maybe things that you used to really desire really strongly and get obsessed with, you don't desire quite so strongly. Because there's this inner happiness, inner awareness that sees the true nature of things and knows, desires are impermanent. I've had them before, but they've arisen, they've passed away. Or things that make you angry, experiences, people, situations, physical sensations that bring up irritation, anger. You can see that after practicing meditation regularly for a while, you don't get quite so angry as before. The anger may still arise, still get irritation arise, but you don't grasp onto it and buy into it so much as before. So little by little you get this new awareness, this new insight that these things are impermanent. Yes, I do still get angry, greedy, worried, afraid, but I can see there's also the part of the mind that is becoming more aware of letting them go because they are impermanent. And what's impermanent is not a self. So when we say impermanence, not self, we don't mean there's nothing there, but it's our view of these experiences, the moods of the mind, the thoughts, the emotions, the moods, the desires, the attachments. It's the attitude towards them and the view of them that's changing. So when monks talk about emptiness, it's emptiness of that grasping of self and the identification with the sense of self in those things. It's what they're talking about. It doesn't mean to say your mind goes blank and stops functioning. That can happen temporarily in meditation, people do blank out, but it's not the goal of the meditation, it's not what we're looking for. And emptiness is not really that. Emptiness is more seeing our experience as empty of self, so the mind is not grasping at it and clinging onto it in the same old way. So with emptiness and experiencing emptiness, however briefly, however fleetingly, in just a minor kind of small way, the mind feels happy, the mind feels peaceful. And accompanying that peace, one gains confidence, one gains the sense of this is something valuable, I want to do more of this, I want to experience more of this. But we do have to keep practicing. It comes back to re-establishing our effort in the practice, doing more meditation, practicing more mindfulness. But sometimes you even have the really good experiences. Say you're not meditating, you're not sitting there with your eyes closed, but you go to work, or you're sitting in a car somewhere, or you're at home. Something is happening, some ordinary activity. But because you have practiced mindfulness before, learned to turn your attention inwards, you've experienced some letting go before, some insights into emptiness before, those insights can return in quite ordinary situations. And this is very important also, because then it's a sign that your mind is actually growing and maturing through the practice, where you're not trying to have an insight or trying to make your mind peaceful, but quite naturally it's seeing something the way it is. So maybe something happens, something goes wrong in your day. You say you're caught in a traffic jam and you're late, and you would normally get a little bit frustrated, unhappy with what's going on, text your friend, tell them you can't get there on time or whatever. But at that moment you also have a sense of awareness coming up, and these things pass. The feeling of irritation, dissatisfaction because you're trapped in your traffic jam, this is just a feeling. And this feeling is not really a me or who I am, it's just a feeling arising into my awareness. And you maybe can see that at that moment. You see the impermanence of the feeling. It arises, it's there for a while, it passes away. Just as when you were practicing meditation with your eyes closed and your legs crossed, but now you're just in an ordinary situation, but that same insight can arise. And at that moment, you have a great sense of relief, and you say, okay, I can't change this situation. Say you're in a traffic jam, nothing you can do, but you let the feeling of irritation or frustration go. That is true insight. And then you have a real sense of happiness. Oh, now I know how to look after my mind when I'm getting stressed. Most people find this is the way their meditation progresses over time. It's that not only do they improve their level of mindfulness as they're doing formal meditation, sitting on their cushion with their eyes closed, legs crossed, but also the general understanding and insight into the nature of these 5 khandhas as being impermanent, as being stressful, and as being not self, grows and becomes clearer to them little by little, and gradually in a deeper, more profound way over time. That's where we get our real motivation to keep practicing. Anytime you have an insight into impermanence, just letting go of that mood of frustration or some desire that was really nagging you, some reaction to what other people say that was, you were suffering with that reaction, but then you have enough awareness just to see, oh, it's impermanent, it's not self. And your mind goes quiet. And you understand that's what I have to do in the practice. That's the path that leads to the end of the suffering. If I do that more often and do it better, more efficiently, I'll get more peace. I'll have more happiness, more freedom. And so your faith in the practice, your confidence to keep practicing, your wish to keep practicing will grow. And this is exactly what the Buddha was encouraging us to do, to use our life in this way. We really do need to learn how to look after our minds as human beings, because otherwise our mind tends to be just a kind of a victim to anything that's coming up in its experience. So pleasant things, we latch onto them, we love them, we like them, we want more of them, we get afraid we're going to lose them. Unpleasant experiences, we hate them, we want to get rid of them, and we're pushing them away, and we don't find much peace moving between what we like and what we don't like all the time through life. Whether just on the external level, dealing with our day, going to work, dealing with people, our health, how our sense of physical well-being is, or on the subtlest level, just the desires and attachments we have to ideas of who we are, what we want in life, that also you'll see latch on to our practice of meditation. So regularly meditators will see, you have some feeling of letting go, experiencing some calm and some insight. Everything is to be let go. I don't want to hold on because it's suffering. Then they re-establish a sense of identity based on that. So they have their feeling of pleasure from letting go and from meditating, and then the sense of self or conceit forms around that. So even the subtlest pleasures and successes in meditation can still trick us if we're not careful. So the Buddha encouraged us to keep contemplating our experience, never sit back and be complacent, but just keep watching, because sometimes even the most subtlest feeling of letting go, peaceful, or experience of emptiness can still be a basis for conceit. And it can also be that cause where sometimes we're meditating, we say, I have to attain that, I have to get that, I want to be that person who has let go or is experiencing peace or emptiness. And of course, as soon as we create this sense of self as we're meditating, we're going to suffer again, because if we don't get what we want, we get disappointed. Or if we get what we want, then we cling on to it and want to hold on to it, and sometimes we can't hold on to it. So even meditation can do that to a human being. We can become so attached to our meditation and what we want from it, it actually becomes our biggest obstacle. If you talk to monks who meditate regularly, and one of the most common kind of experiences they have of letting go is when they're getting ill. Because if you're meditating every day and you practice and you put energy into it and effort, then of course when you fall ill, you'll feel like, this is no good, I can't do what I want to do, I can't meditate, I've got no energy, or I've got some pain. it'll naturally be a time of disappointment. But many monks find at the time they're getting ill or feeling very low, very weak, there's a shift in their way of viewing their meditation, because they realize at that time that they can't meditate as they would normally like to. They can't sit for long hours and walk meditation for long hours because they're ill. They realize they have to let go because the body is not supporting their desire. Then they realize they were practicing with desire because now they have to let that desire go because they're ill. So the illness actually exposes a certain kind of desire or attachment that they didn't notice before. And so even they get to the point sometimes where they say, oh, thank you, illness. That was useful to have because it showed me how much desire for attainment and desire to get this and be that and be a certain kind of person, a certain kind of monk or a certain kind of meditator that I didn't see before. I didn't see that desire before, but now because I got ill, I've seen it, I know it, so I've learned something. And this is an important point in Buddhism. Whatever the suffering, the problem you're facing, whether it's illness or relationship problem or money problem or whatever, if you're using it as a basis for contemplating attachment to your own 5 Candas, even suffering and problems can be the place where wisdom and insight arises. So illness has prompted many people to understand better how much of the time they're following the desire to attain things, get things, be things. So illness can be quite a help in that sense. Of course, you don't want illness. Illness can be lethal. You can die from illness. So of course, we don't want it. But if it happens, sometimes it's a very useful teacher. And the same with other things. The obvious one at the moment, half the world is in lockdown or going into lockdown or coming out of lockdown. Lockdown is a good experience in the sense to learn to see your own 5 Candas at work, where you can't follow every desire, where you're experiencing new things, where maybe you're stuck indoors, you can't go out. The feelings that brings up, the perceptions it brings up. Just the word lockdown probably brings up a perception is, I hate lockdown, I don't want lockdown, give me freedom from lockdown, whatever. But if you use it as an opportunity to learn about yourself, learn about your attachment to your own 5 Candas, how suffering arises and how to let go of it, or even something as simple as the concept of lockdown can be a learning experience. And you realize, it's just a word. That word we invest a lot of negative perceptions in. Why? Because it's frustration from not being able to do all these things that lockdown doesn't let you do. But you take that as a learning experience, investigate the perception of lockdown, for instance. It could be something else, but in this case, lockdown. And you start to see how the Candas are at work and how they feed and support each other. So you hear the word lockdown, you get a slightly negative feeling, and then you get a negative train of thought. That perception is sustained. The more you hear the word lockdown, the more you feel that way, the worse it gets. Maybe it gets so bad that you get sort of post-traumatic stress disorder based on lockdown. It's just the word lockdown already, you tense up, you go into panic mode, stress mode in your body as well as your mind. I'm kind of exaggerating it here, but you know what I mean. Lockdown or some other negative thing in your life to do with people or health or other things can do this. And what it is we're not observing the Candas, our 5 groups of experiences at work. So if you learn to practice meditation more often, bring up the mindfulness, calm the mind, you're bringing the mind inwards, then you can see some of the ways our mind grasps at the Candas and it's going to get weighed down by the feelings, the thoughts, the perceptions, and suffers. So you take it as an example, lockdown. How does that work for me? The thought of lockdown, the feelings associated with the word lockdown, the perceptions that come up. everything, you're just driving along or see the word lockdown and you sort of shrink away in fear. You can see how the Candas are playing with you in that way. You're a victim of your own 5 Candas if you're not mindful. Whereas if you bring up the mindfulness, you may still have those feelings and you're aware of the perception and the not liking the word lockdown or whatever else it may be, but you're now treating it as a place of learning. Oh, the perception lockdown, how should I deal with that? How should I observe that? Well, I can observe it. It's a perception. It arises. It passes away. It's temporary. It's a negative perception. I've built up that negative perception. How should I deal with that? We'll try to bring up the mindfulness. Allow the perception to rise, but don't hold on to it. Don't identify with it, because that will make you feel more negative, more unhappy. Just let it be. If you can just let that perception be, that word be, or if it's a feeling in your body, just let it be, your mind can go quiet. Maybe it can ignore it altogether, or at least tolerate it, and certainly not build it up into anything more suffering than it needs to be. And the more you practice with your 5 Candas and observe them, learn about them, you'll realize, you can't get rid of every unpleasant experience in your life, but you can change your attitude to it. By bringing out mindfulness and using it as a basis for wisdom, contemplation, you can still find peace even in unpleasant things, unpleasant perceptions, thoughts, feelings, the body. It doesn't have to colour your whole experience of life. And this is where real freedom, liberation comes from. This is what the Buddha was encouraging us to do, to liberate ourselves through mindfulness and wisdom, not identifying and attaching with everything as self, but knowing experience, knowing its nature is impermanent, stressful, not self, and then letting go. And the best kind of letting go comes from when you have insight and wisdom, because that kind of letting go tends to completely solve the problem and it doesn't return. And the more we do that, the less problems you have, or the biggest problems sort of shrink down to smaller problems. The smaller problems disappear completely from your life. And that's how meditation teaches us to grow as human beings, and we can really do something very good, very wonderful with our life. So today I've talked a little bit about meditation, mindfulness of breathing, and then contemplating the 5 Candas. Maybe I'll just say this much for now, but if there are any questions, then we should have some time for questions afterwards.